Aloha, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Warrior Women in the World of Entrepreneurship podcast. I'm your host, Kolo, and today's Warrior Woman guest is author, adventurer, horsewoman, and once a park ranger with the National Park Service, Kristen Britain. Kristen published her first book at 13 years old, and that's a cartoon collection called Horses and Horse People, and later went on to receive a degree in film production, and a minor in writing at Ithaca College. So Kristen would go on later to author the epic fantasy novel series that has 7 not so tiny books and an 8th in the making, The Green Rider, which is actually my favorite book series. So this is an extra special conversation today. So Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today and being willing to enlighten and share with our listeners how you became successful in your industry.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. So obviously you've been writing for a long time. Like you said, when you were 13, you'd already created a book then, but what you went to college for film and writing. So where did you want to go with that? Like, what was your initial thing? Did you want to be a writer always, or did you want to get in the film industry as a writer? Like, what was that vision for you?
Well, I think I always wanted to be a writer. And
Okay.
if they had had the writing major back then at Ithaca, I probably would have pursued that. The filmmaking was another way of telling stories. And I grew up in the era of E.T. and Star Wars and all those kind of great classic films. And so a lot of the students like myself who were in the cinema program were influenced by that kind of filmmaking. And so we pursued that with making our own films in college.
How did you like that?
I liked it. I was one of the few women doing film production at that time because it's quite technical, and having to learn various different motion picture cameras back in the day when we really used film, sound engineering, and so on. It was a really machine oriented and team playing type of art.
Okay. So then you graduated from there with that degree. What was your plan there after graduation? Did you know that you wanted to write novels, fantasy novels, or had you wanted to write for a paper? Like, what was your mindset? And then I know I read also in your bio that travel called. So I don't know if that was after your college degree that you decided to become a park ranger. So just go into a little bit about that, just series of events in your life.
Yeah, it seems kind of improbable to go from like filmmaking to National Park Service. But I was kind of lost after I graduated college, and because I didn't really know what direction to take. And so I considered about applying for graduate work, maybe for animation out at I forget what they call the Disney school out there where they do animation degrees. And then I started doing some volunteer work during this time period. One was at a local nature center, and another was at Women's Rights National Historical Park, which has a connection to my writing minor because my professor took her class, which was a women in writing class, to the site of the very first women's rights convention held in 1848. And I happened to miss that field trip and went, after college. I thought, well, this is looks like kind of interesting career when I saw the rangers and talked to them, and they talked about having on their applications to talk about, trapping bears and stuff. I thought, well, that sounds interesting, and you get to travel. There's parks all over the country. And so I continued volunteering and decided to start applying, and ended up with my first seasonal position down at Clara Barton National Historic Site in Maryland.
Okay. Were you still writing in your, I would say free time, but I mean, being a park ranger, your hands are pretty full during the hours that you work. I actually used to want to be one at Lake George. So they were always busy at Rogers Rocks. So which was, more just a campground within nature. But how did you find time to write during that? Or were you still just kind of lost and not really understanding what direction you wanted to go in, except for that of nature right now and finding out what works for you.
Well, I started writing when I was a kid,
Right.
and I never stopped. I
Okay.
mean, it was just one of those things that I always did.
Sure. So it was inherent with you. So then when did we get to the point of, let's fast forward a little bit. When did you start knowing that you could make a career of it, of being an author? Because that's where we are now. Yeah. Like you're
Yep.
full-time
Yep.
author. Okay. So when were you able to make that transition? And also what were the steps, right? Because we all desire to be what we dream to be, right? And some of us might not always know what it is, especially right after college. You're not the only one, believe me. We're still all of us come out of college like, huh, we were supposed to know more by now. But we
Um,
don't always. So
yes,
um
you get into your middle age and you still don't know it all. So
yeah, I mean, but that's what life is, right? It's about every day and every moment and just kind of learning to adapt and to grow. And it'll, you have to go after it. You can't wait for something to come to you. But when you do, you just don't know the road it's going to take you down. And it's quite exciting because it's like, yes, have your goals and make sure you know where you want to go, but just learn step by step. And that's why, like I said, this podcast is here, because maybe there's other authors out there who are trying to get their work published, or and they just don't know the steps, like when do they get representation, how can they afford to get representation, do you maintain your full-time job for how long until you get that. So if we can go a little more into that and how we can best help those out there, then that would be, I'd be grateful.
yeah, well, the steps, first of all, the first step is to love writing, because otherwise it's just totally not worth your time. And to
Reevaluate.
practice, and develop if you're going to write fiction novels, develop a manuscript that, to your very best ability, that is publishable. And then you have to find an avenue of publishing it. Now, I started all this writing Green Rider in the early 90s. And then I started shopping it around and so forth. And so it's a very different environment nowadays, where people very often will independently publish their own work. I think some of the basic steps are still there for people who want to be traditionally published.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very different world from when I started, mostly because of the internet and computer development. But in any case, you study what agents and what editors are accepting the type of novel you have written, and in this case, science fiction and fantasy publishers. I tried shopping around the book to some publishers first. And while they said very nice things about it and invited me to resubmit, no one was biting. And then I found a local author who happened to be an author who came out very strong with his first book and was a major bestseller. He lived practically down the road from me. And so I met him at his first book signing here on the island, and asked for his advice, and he said, get an agent. And so I tried to get an agent, and I tried his agent, of course. And that agent had some very good suggestions, and then I did more revision. So there was a lot of revision involved.
Unfortunately, in any kind of creative work, you have to just go back and look at it. And every time you do, it's just like, yeah, you have new eyes, but there's certain times where you're looking at it a little too hard too. And it's just like you get caught in this vicious cycle of like, well, now I don't know if it's the direction I want it to go in. And also if this is even what I was trying to say. So I imagine that can also be pretty difficult. But like you said, practice is essential. And also it was great that you had that person down the street that could give you the advice, or at least give you the resource of that other person. So that's super important. And I don't think you necessarily would have found that without just plugging away and keep trying.
Yep. And that's very true. And the agent had great advice in the letter he sent me. And then, because like you said, you start to see the trees and not the forest, or you see the forest and not the trees. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whichever. And so I contacted that author. We developed a friendship, and he agreed to look at my manuscript. And he gave me suggestions. And so I revised some more. And then finally, when he reread it and thought it was adequate, we sent it back to his agent, or we contacted his agent, and the agent said, let us see it. And I ended up with one of his associates as my first agent.
Wow.
And from there, it was in the agent's hands. He shopped it. And I had a couple of publishing companies that were interested. And one of them was Daw Books, and I happened to have a lot of Daw books on my shelves. And even though they didn't offer me as much as the other company, I felt like the book would be a better fit there, just because they were kind of publishing in the same vein as what I was writing.
Right. So it already had the audience, and as well, you knew that you enjoyed the products it was producing. So that's
Correct.
important for sure. Maintaining that integrity and not just quote unquote selling out. I don't want to say it like that, because I get when people have to choose that. But at the same time, if you choose that, know that you're giving up part of your soul when you do that, because you won't get to make these decisions that you want. And yeah, the money looks nice and definitely needed, especially as like a beginning artist and entrepreneur. Like starving artist is a real thing, like, for sure. So it's just trying to get those funds to even afford, because you have to pay for an agent, yeah, to represent you.
You don't want to pay for an agent. No, that
Okay.
that is probably a scam artist. The
Okay.
agent works for you, and
Okay.
the money comes through them, funnels through them from the publisher. Don't pay an agent.
Important notes. This is why
Yeah.
I'm not an author right now.
Yeah. If you have questions about that, you can go to like SWFA, SWIFA, yeah, .org, which is the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. And they will have advice. There's writers beware. Just, there's a lot of scam artists out there, and you don't pay for somebody to publish you,
Right,
to
because they'll
publish
get a
you
commission, right?
or to agent you.
Gotcha.
The money
Uh,
comes to the author.
Sorry, say that last part again.
The money comes to the author, or it
Right.
should. Yeah.
And then with it, so with an agent, I guess they take a commission off of it, right? That's how that usually
Yes, that's
works.
correct.
Okay. Awesome. See, I should know things too, because it should work the same way, either with probably for musicians and also actors as well. So gotcha. See, good notes. Perfect. So just kind of backtracking a little bit, how did you know it was the Green Rider that you wanted to get published? Because you said you've been writing since you were 13, like we've said. So why this particular piece of work?
I'd actually, when I was in high school, written a couple novels, and in the fall of 1992, when I sat down to start writing, I had been trying all kinds of short stories, and nobody was buying them, or if they wanted the short story, they folded before it was published. So I decided I don't really, short stories aren't really my thing. So I'm going to do my true love, which is long fiction. And so springing off kind of from that work I did as a teenager in high school, I started writing along, and this character jumped out at me. It was a messenger that was, in the original writing, a male. And then for some reason I changed it to female, and she just sort of insisted upon being written about. And that was, of course, Kerrigan Gladian, who's the protagonist of the Green Rider series. And so that's how that particular book got started.
That's awesome. I mean, I think it's from your own experiences, right? I think that always draws into what you write about, or if you're a musician, what you sing about. And like you said, first of all, when you were in college, you were one of the few, women weren't common in the writing field. I guess that's not really a great way to phrase that, but you were saying that within your field, there wasn't many women yet. Was that
correct? It was, I'd sit on the sound stage in a circle with the other students, and they and the professor were all male, and I was the only female in the class. So
love that. I had mentioned in another podcast I did, I've always been an athlete. And for most of my life, I fought very hard that, girls can do what boys can do. So I typically my first sport even was T-ball. I was the only girl on the team. And same thing with like roller hockey. For years, I was the only girl on the team. And I loved it. Like it was empowering, and it was nice to just be on that either on the field or on the rink. And, some of the guys wouldn't, treat you the same, but usually if it was your teammates, they would, because you know what, regardless, I'm here, I'm on this team and we're out there. So if we don't play like a team, we're not going to be a team. And it was great. You just felt at home and you felt like you were a warrior. You felt like you were in this together. So it's nice when you can find that, but you have to fight for it, because people are always going to have that stigma in their mind, of just a male dominated world in certain things. And yes, it's changing with time, but nowadays it's a little hard because sometimes it's a little too forced. I feel like, people don't like when change happens fast, and guess what? They need to suck it up sometimes, but it's just how you introduce it to make it effective. And the reason I love your book series so much is because of that female protagonist, and also she's just so it's hilarious to me because she's always just kind of finding herself in these moments of like, oh man, I have to do that. Like, she doesn't aim to do it, but she's duty bound and honor bound, whether she realizes it or wants to do it or not. I think in one of the recent books, she was like, well, the reason I do it is because nobody else is around to do it. So what am I going to do? Just let it happen. So, I kind of really relate to that. So it's just good that you were able to focus on just that female empowerment, just kind of naturally, through what you've experienced and also through the book series that has reached so many people now. And it's quite amazing. And it's not just females, it's non-binary males, everybody, which is really cool to see. And it's amazing to have met and seen so many of the people who follow you. It's quite incredible. So well done on that.
Fabulous. Yeah.
So just going back into how we can help our listeners here who, like I said, are potential entrepreneurs, and just kind of diving into a little bit more of the technical, what were the major issues that you found within that first? Obviously, like you said, you had tried to go with different publishers, and yes, you found DAW, but what were the challenges that you found thereafter? Maybe leading up until the deal with DAW, and then afterward, what would have been your greatest challenges with becoming a full-time author?
Well, it took quite a while because I think the starting advance that a writer will get on a first book hasn't changed an awful lot since then. And back then it hadn't changed for years and years and years. So I think for a traditionally published commercial book, unless it's going to be like this huge breakout thing, your advance is going to be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. And I don't think that has changed a whole lot since those days.
Do you think it was different also, like male to female, or you don't know?
I don't know, because it's not easy to know all the time what other people are getting paid. I kind of suspect so. I will also say that epic fantasy is also a more male, or it has been in the past, more male dominated part of the fantasy genre.
Yeah.
So when I was doing that, there weren't a lot of us.
It is nice to have a woman's voice as well as the author. It definitely does change ever so slightly, but it does. Yeah, I've read other fantasy books as well, and like I can tell the difference when it's a man writing it versus a woman. And there's, it's just different. There is no like, oh, this is better, this is worse. It's just kind of what you vibe with. And I've liked those as well, but there's a certain concentration and detail, I think, between like when a perspective, I think, when a woman writes it versus a male. And the reason, so going back to what you were talking about, so advances haven't changed in many years, which is something that I definitely want to talk about as well. But can you just kind of go over what an advance is exactly? Like, we know what it is, but can you explain like how that works within like your book series or any book series that anybody's trying to publish?
Okay. When a publisher purchases the right to license your book to publish it, they will give you a certain amount of money for it. And so let's say you get that $10,000 advance. You don't get it all at once. You will get probably half of it up front. And then if your book sells through, that is, it sells enough to compensate the publisher for the money they're putting out, you will begin earning royalties. I'm sort of messing this all up, of course. So, okay, you start with the 10,000, they will give you 5,000 up front, and then after a certain point, give you the second half. For me, it's worked out into 4 lumps. I'll sell a book to my publisher. They'll give me around a quarter of the first allotment of that particular advance. And then we publish the book, and they'll come with the second quarter. And then the trade paperback will come out, and they will do the third quarter. Or is that the fourth quarter? So confusing.
Well, that's why we ask these questions though, right? Because it's, you're going through right now this, and you've been doing this for many years now, but it's, people might even just be starting to figure out that they want to write, or maybe it's a long life passion that they didn't do because they thought they had to do something else with their life, and now they can finally go with what they want to do. And maybe they're trying to do all this, but they have no direction. They have no idea what all of this entails. And, when you're in it and you've been, like you said, you've been practicing and researching, you'll understand more. But right now, this is also for those who might be starting out, and even those who have been in the game, but maybe missed a few steps. And it's just what your experience, this is your experience that we're talking about. So, whatever yours was or is, that's going to add value to anybody else's life as well, because it's stuff we might not know. So like I said, we appreciate you just going over it regardless.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is that you don't get the chunk all at once.
Sure.
And so, don't go out and put 10,000 down on a car when you're only getting 5,000, to start out with. And probably don't go out and buy that car, because, it's a very hard to become a full-time author and make a living from it. And unless you are one of those huge breakout stars, like a Pat Rothfuss, for instance.
Oh. How were you able to do it? Or when was the moment that you were able to do that and make that switch to full-time author? I'll
take artist.
There you go.
So we sold Green Rider to Daw in 1996. And then came the waiting of 2 years before they actually put it out. I did not leave the Park Service to become a full-time writer until 2003.
Okay.
It's just, they'll tell you that I could not live off what I was getting for my books until around 2003, when we made a new deal for 4 more books. Yeah, I think that's how that worked. But, you have to, you talk to Madeline Shane, who worked on the soundtrack project, and she talked about taking a leap of faith. Yeah. And that's exactly what this was, but I tried to make it an educated leap of faith, where I knew, okay, I can live without all the cushy things and big vacations and what have you, because I was a park ranger. I didn't get paid much, right?
Yeah.
So I can do that, and I can survive doing this, or if I have to take another job, I can do that in the future. And so I just tried to educate myself and make sure I wasn't going to create a problem for myself. When I made that transition, it was very difficult to leave behind health benefits. And so that is a major difficulty when you're self-employed or you have a small business, what have you, in this country.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. My accountant yells at me often. He doesn't yell at me, but he's always like, so when did you have this health insurance? And I was like, what health insurance? Not only that, but I was like, I think I had it for like a month or two. And then of course, like, stuff happens. And I always say that in this podcast, I'm like, stuff happens. Yeah, life happens, bills happen. And health insurance is important, because when you get those medical bills, that's a big hit at once. But it also sucks because you are hesitant to go to the doctors, and you're hesitant to get important things checked. And it's like, oh, well, it's going to be like $1 million because I don't have health insurance. And then you're looking for that. And then you finally pay for it. And it's just more money out of your pocket that it is already very hard to keep in. Because again, especially as an entrepreneur, like Kristen was saying, it's just you have to make sure that you're budgeting correctly because you're spending somewhat, at least for me. So I teach martial arts and fitness, and mats are expensive. Mats are super expensive for like what we walk on, and making sure that it's safe for kids and adults. And fitness equipment, a kettlebell that's like 15 or 20 pounds is like between 50 and $70 each. And then you want to use it for like a class. So, and yes, even with a wholesale deal, it's still super expensive. And that's why people get, these small business loans, which I have not yet because I don't desire to go into more debt yet. And I'm still working on learning budgeting and avoiding cushy things like Starbucks coffee or whatever the case may be. And I don't even like Starbucks that much. But the point is so we went into your transition from going from park ranger to full-time author, which took from 1996 to 2003, you said, right? So I guess what was that point that you knew that you could, like you said, you just kind of took that leap of faith, right?
Yeah. At my
educated leap of faith.
At my day job, I was kind of at my end because it was very much an editing and writing job, even for the Park Service. And so I had these two full-time careers of writing. I would be at my desk at the park on the computer all day, and working on the writing or whatever my task was. And I would come home, eat a quick supper, and I'd be on the computer working on the writing until about 10 at night and go to bed and start again in the morning. And so it was really becoming difficult mentally and physically, I suppose.
And I know you received a lot of pressure too, because there was a long time between books. I remember like reading about that, and people would be like, your fans especially would be like, where's this book? Like, whatever. And even I'm reading this, like, freaking relax, be lucky you're getting these. Like, it's like, let the artist do their thing. The more that you push, the more that they don't want to do something. And not that it affects you like that or the people have that, but like leave me alone to do my thing. Like this, you enjoy it for a reason. Just let me do my process. But how did you cope with that? And how did you still find that love and that joy for what you did? And was there ever a moment where you kind of lost it?
Yeah, there was a very difficult period after Green Rider came out. I wrote the sequel very quickly. When I wrote Green Rider, I didn't assume there was going to be a sequel. Mm-hmm. So the book kind of stands alone if you want it to. But with the original deal, they wanted it to be 2 books at least. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote that book within a year. It was hard, it was long, and my editor didn't like it. And so this is another important thing for people who are hoping to be published traditionally, is you could write your second book and your editor won't like it. And you can imagine how crestfallen I was, which is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
All that work and all that stress, and for what? And so the writing mind, however, is a very tenacious thing. And checking in with my editor now and then, I began writing a whole new book too. And that's why there was this long period between the first book and the second book.
Sure.
A lot of authors do have a lot of trouble with their sophomore effort. It's called second bookitis. And so I'm not alone there, but I sure felt alone. After that happened, I felt like this is never going to work. I'm never going to be the writer that I dreamed of. I'm never going to be published again, what have you.
Yeah. So when did that change? And how did you find, I guess, the momentum back to it? And were there people there to help you? And was there ever a moment where you kind of got out of that feeling of aloneness, I guess? Loneliness?
Well, I did have some good friends, and they helped with that. One of them is Julie Trinita, who got her first book published with DAW about the same time. Well, there's a year between that, but we both got accepted at the same time for our first books. And she's been around the sun a few more times than me and is a wise person. And so I could get advice from her and other friends as well. And it's just like I say, the writing mind is very tenacious, and no matter what was happening to me mentally, the hindbrain was still going blah, 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 and the stories were still coming. And so I was able to recover and write that book, and things have been pretty okay since then. So
Gotcha. Sorry, that just reminded me of this is going to sound totally random, but it's not. Every time I go to get a massage, I always feel the need to have to talk to my masseuse. Like, it's funny because I'm like, okay, I'm going to be quiet now. I'm going to let you do your thing. So another story that I have, and I'm like, what is wrong? Why are you just shut up, Colo, shut up. But it just ends up going, and they're fine with it, but it's funny because it's more like I need to relax and I just keep talking for whatever reason. I don't know. It's just, but it's there. And so I understand. So I just want to kind of go back to also, you were talking about the traditional route of getting published, and also what was the other route, like self-publishing? Is that what's the term for that?
Independent publishing.
Could you just go over a little more specifically what the differences are between them?
Mm-hmm.
I know, again, they sound self-explanatory, but not always.
Traditional publishing is where you sell your manuscript to a publisher who is in New York or somewhere, and they will edit your book, they will give it the cover, and they will then in turn sell it to or place it in bookstores where it gets sold. To be independently publishing, you are in charge of not only writing the book, but finding an editor and hiring an editor to do that, hiring somebody to make a cover, possibly hiring somebody to do all the formatting and all the marketing. All of that falls on you. But when you have a publisher, they take care of all that extra rigmarole so you can write your next book.
So you can do your thing.
Yeah.
Did you said you had experienced both, or no, you primarily just went the traditional route?
I'm pretty much old fashioned and went the whole traditional route.
Sure. There's nothing wrong with that too, because it's nice to have other people do that work for you. And I guess what would be the benefits of being an independent publisher versus going the traditional route that you could see?
You have all the control over, everything, basically. You have control over when it comes out, what the cover looks like. You don't have to give a percentage to your agent.
That's always nice.
You get all the royalties right up front, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like you're also putting that money back into, again, like you said, finding the editor and all these people that you do have to pay. Like you said, you don't have to pay your agent if you get one. But at the same time, like if you're doing an independent, if you are independently publishing for yourself or even anybody else, that goes, does that happen? Like people who independently publish, do they also like take on other people's novels, or no, it's primarily just their own stuff?
I think there are people out there who freelance edit,
sure,
and do these other jobs in addition to their own. I mean, it's a way to make some extra cash, I suppose.
Right, especially when you've already found those resources. You're like, well, it's kind of almost like a printing press. It's just like, well, I bought the stuff, I want to just use it for me. But sometimes it is just for people's projects. So kind of going into that and budgeting. So yes, you went the more traditional route, but I'm sure you had to pay for your own materials and writing. And what were some tools that you had to buy? What were things that you had to get for your work that you had to directly invest in?
Well, really boring stuff like the computer, the printer, the monitor, that kind of thing. And I do handwrite my manuscripts first.
That's right.
Yeah. And so lots of pens, lots and lots of pens and paper.
Which I know sounds funny and you're like, the boring stuff. But guess what, guys? That builds up, like, especially over like years of doing it and probably the amount of times that you've had to scrap a paper. It's a lot. So don't forget to factor that into your writing and what you want to do.
Recently, I bought a whole case of lined paper, which is loose leaf paper, which is what I write on. Because, with the shortages and everything, I was finding it hard to just, get some loose leaf paper. And so finally I just, sprang for a whole case of it. I'm good for the next, I don't know, 10 years,
Which
15 years.
again is like investment, but hopefully, yes, it'll last that long
And
for you. And I know this sounds funny, anybody who's listening, even if again, you're not interested in becoming an author or it's just not your line of work, all of these things are very important because again, it just shows that we all have to start somewhere, and where we started isn't necessarily the direction that we had to take along the way. And I'm so happy that, Kristen, you were able to eventually make it full-time as an author, but it took time. I myself am the culprit of I'm very patient with other people. With myself, maybe not so much. So I'm always expecting change to happen very quickly because I typically am a fast learner, but I have to remember that, yes, although I might be a fast learner, I'm used to things coming quickly. So then it's like, okay, that's great. I was going to say al principio, at the beginning, it is like that. But then when it gets to that intermediate to middle part of the stage, I'm just like sitting there, like tapping my fingers, like, all right, now I'm ready. When is this coming? But you have to make sure to have patience when you're creating your own business, whether again, you're an artist and you're having to also go in and rely on other people and also find other people to be able to help you in the first place. So again, sorry, just backtracking. When you had started, you said you were looking through the book of trying to find different, different publishers and also different agents to use, and you had somebody that recommended it to you. So now we can just Google it and search online. But first of all, how have you been able to kind of transition with all the technology and Instagram? And I saw you got a TikTok now, which I'm still struggling with, and Facebook and all of that. So how have you been able to adapt with it and use it to your advantage for your book series? And also, I guess, what would you recommend with that for maybe new authors, if you have any recommendations on how to use it?
Well, when I was doing my research, there was not really an internet. So I had to go to the library and, look up Publishers Weekly and Bowker's and all these different things that you can reference.
Yep.
But yeah, you can just do so much online now, between the research or going onto these social media sites to help people be aware of your work. And I'm an introvert, and I'm an introvert, not just in person, but I'm an introvert online as well. So it's really difficult. And I really dislike being on camera. It's just,
Thank you.
so here I am. Yep. And I'm doing some TikToks, and it's really difficult for me.
Sure.
But it's also really important. And when you do engage with your audience, it's quite special, and it's really nice to know they're out there, because otherwise, after you put a book out, it's very quiet.
Like,
but this way, I can, hear people's frustrations and happiness and excitement firsthand.
For better or worse, I guess. Luckily,
Yeah.
I think you get a lot of good, but I'm sure I've also seen a lot of not so good of just people, giving their opinions of what should happen and what shouldn't happen, rather than just like what they hope to happen. It's just like, y'all can just calm down until you do your own thing, first of all. But that's the thing, right? It's up for interpretation, and you know what, like, you wrote it and that's your baby, and we're either here to enjoy it or not. And whether it goes the way that we want or not, like, we're in it. So
as I always say, that they are welcome to not read the next book and, go. There's so many authors out there that they are sure to find something they'll like.
Yeah, but you're always going to find critics. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the thing that we have to deal with as artists. Like, I write songs as well. And it's just like, it's funny because when you're like, when you put a book out there, it goes real quiet after. And could you imagine imagine being at a concert, to all my listeners right now? Imagine being at a concert, great song, whatever it was, like, song finishes and nobody's clapping at the moment. Like, it's just maybe a delayed reaction of just like, it was so epic. And then there's clapping. But in that brief moment of no sound, you're like, fuck, like, what is happening? What's the acceptance or not? And yes, okay, for an artist, you have to accept your work and you always want to make it to the best of your ability, but you do want people to like it. You do want people to enjoy your work. And, that's why you share it. Otherwise you just keep it to yourself. So it's very bold to try and to put your work out there. It's a brave thing to do. And like you're saying, like you don't like being on camera. And I really, really appreciate that you're here and you're doing this to try and help other just warrior women out there and just anybody, any entrepreneurs that are out there. That's why this is important. So like I said, I really appreciate you doing that. And, you know, that's something that martial arts teaches you as well, is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And that just means that like there's going to be moments that you don't like. It's not saying like you should do anything that's like dangerous that you don't like. No means no. But like, but you should venture out of your comfort zone, because there are so many wondrous things on the other side of that fear. And I personally have let fear stop me a lot of times for maybe silly things like, okay, jumping off a short cliff in Lake George. Like I used to do it when I was 12, no problem. And like, now Anthony's nose looks like 1,000,000 feet up and it's only 10 feet and I'm scared shitless. And I've walked up there and I stopped and I walked back down. And do you know how that haunts me? And that's the thing. It's like, but you're doing this. You are on camera now. I know I'm reminding you, but you're here and we're chilling. We're having a good time. We're having a conversation and hopefully helping others who do this. And whether people listen or not, like I said, I'm still beginning with this podcast. And, I look at the stats and the reviews and who's viewed it. And it's a little discouraging sometimes when it's like lower numbers, but then you see like, okay, 2 weeks later that it's grown, and it's pretty amazing if you give it patience and time. So like I said, I appreciate you being on here and just kind of getting out of your comfort zone. So that being said, Kristen, if there's one thing you want our listeners to take away from our conversation today and just in general, what would that be?
I think that, whatever you do in life, especially if it's something like writing, that you just have to really follow your passion and, if possible, not worry about the money up front. Just write. I wrote for years and years and years before ever being published. And practice will make you perfect. And in time, if it's something you really want, it'll happen. I mean, if I got published, anybody can. So.
And you worked for that too. Like you said, with practice, it does get better because again, you're also you're contacting and you're listening to other authors. And like you said, a few different people had written to you. Were they editors or the ones that wrote to you that had given you some advice on your writing in the beginning?
It was the agent I had
Okay.
asked to look at my manuscript.
Okay. And then also now you said that, like you said, Julie Trinata, Trinata. Did you meet her after you'd started, like once you were working with Daw, or you met beforehand?
We met after we'd both been published there.
So you found a community. Oh, virtually.
Yeah, there was a bulletin board type community that was science fiction and fantasy writing and books and so on. And she was kind of introduced to me by one of the editors. So
yeah. And like you said, I know you're an introvert and you're isolated a lot, and that is comfortable to you, but at a certain time it can be, like you said, lonely. So having those people that can help you and be a part of your community. And now, thank you for being a part of this community that we're building of warrior women. And you've been one for so long already as well. Just like you said, being a woman in an industry that was mainly male dominated, and even in your studies, you're the only woman there, and you stuck it out because you're like, well, fuck it, excuse my language, like, fuck it, I'm going to be in here and I do what I love, and who cares? I'm going to learn. I'm still going to retain this information. They can't hide it from me because they're still giving it to everyone else in the room. So you take it and you go with it and you create with it what you want. Like, who cares what other people think? Definitely listen to if they have the credibility and listen to their advice. And, but again, just like Jeet Kune Do, which is what I teach, it's absorbing what's useful and disregarding what is not for yourself. What they suggest, you're not always going to take every piece of advice because it doesn't work for you. So take what matters, take what makes sense and use it and adapt it. And hopefully you'll come out with a better product and just service. And, like Kristen said, you just keep practicing with that, but practice with the intent of getting better. So Kristen, last but not least, where can folks find your work and also just kind of find you on Instagram and all those fun things in social media? So if you can give us that, it'd be appreciated.
You can find the Green Rider series at most any bookstore chain, or if it's not at a bookstore, you can request it to be ordered for you, or you can go online. I can be found on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, mainly. I don't think
Awesome.
I'm anything.
Are you just under there as Kristen Britain? Awesome. And then also, guys, if you're listening to this and you are interested in contacting Kristen about any appearances or anything, that's also listed on her website. That's how I was able to speak with her, luckily. So someone there set us up, and I'm so grateful for everyone who's a part of that team and just who works with you and works with helping you to create the Green Rider. It's such a special series, and one I didn't expect to be so much a part of my life as it's become. So thank you for all of that and all you do, and thank you for being here today and just helping more people as you can.
Thank you for having me, and it's totally my pleasure.
All right, Kristen, you have a wonderful day. Mahalo and aloha.
Aloha.
Please be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as download our episodes. You can download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any of those. And it really helps us to grow and be able to have more guests on here to be able to share their experiences, their knowledge, and understanding of how to create a successful business, which we are all trying to do or thinking about doing. So again, whether you are a first-time entrepreneur, you're trying to build it now, but don't know where to start, or you're a successful entrepreneur already and you're looking to work with other entrepreneurs in a certain field, we have people on here from all different walks of life and different types of businesses. So please be sure to like and to share these episodes, your favorite ones or any ones that you just are really feeling that day. So be sure to share those and tag us in there. You can tag us at TascoFit. And you can also hashtag WWWE podcast, or if you want to spell it all out, Warrior Women in the World of Entrepreneurship. So just hashtag any of those. And we really, really appreciate you guys. So please help us out with that. And we will keep bringing to you more guests so that we can continue to learn. Aloha, guys.